This is another tutorial on producing Celtic style art using Inkscape. I will create this design from scratch and explain the steps as I do so. I will cover several techniques as you can see in this itinerary. This tutorial is primarily aimed at beginners, but more advanced users will no doubt learn a few techniques as well. Inkscape lends itself well to this style of art design and allows you to create pleasing designs fairly quickly. Hopefully the tutorial will inspire you to make your own designs using similar methods. So I'll start off by creating a new document, and I'll just go to File and Save As, and I'm going to change the format to Inkscape SVG, and we will call it Celtic Art Demo 2. Save that. I want to open the document properties, so you can go to File and find it there. But to the right of it you'll see the keyboard shortcut is Shift, Control and D. So I'll just do that, Control, Shift and D. And we have the document properties. The display units are set to millimeters. I prefer to work in millimeters. I'm not concerned with portrait or landscape. You'll see the reason why later on. And I don't want to show the page border, so I'll turn that off. So that's the document properties set up. I'm using Inkscape 0.92. You can check that yourself if you click on Help. Go to About Inkscape, it'll show you the version that you're using. I believe the latest version is version 1, but I haven't got that yet, so I'll just close that and just set the view zoom. I'm going to set to 1 to 1. If you just press the number 1 key, that will do that. And I'm going to draw a square just as a guide while I create the artwork. So I'm going to this Create Rectangles and Square tool here, click on that. And the way this works is you click and hold the left mouse button and drag diagonally, and if you hold the Control key it will constrain that to be a perfect square rather than a rectangle. When you've got the size that you want, you just release the mouse button and it creates it. Now when you use any of these tools down here, the square, the 3D boxes, the circles and ellipses and stars and pentagons, they create what we call objects in Inkscape. There are two kinds of things that you can work with, objects and paths. So these initially create objects. I'm going to convert that to a path. So if we go up to Path and click Object Path, the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift, Control and C. So that is now a path. And I want to change the fill and stroke. Paths have a fill, which is this yellow colour here, and a border, which we call a stroke. To set a stroke, I'm going to point to the black here. Could be any colour. Let's give it another colour. Let's make it blue. Hold the Shift key down and click, and that now has a blue border. I'm going to open the Fill and Stroke palette. So the keyboard shortcut for that is Shift, Control and F. And here we have the fill and stroke palette. So we set on the fill tab and it's currently set to yellow. If I click on this X, it means there's no fill. If I go on to the stroke style tab here, it's got a stroke width of 8mm. I only want a very fine stroke, so I'm going to change that to 0.5 of a millimetre. And I'm also going to change it to black, so point to the black square down here on the colour palette, hold the shift key down, and that's changed it to black. Now I'm going to get the select and transform objects tool, and it shows that this object is already selected. Up here it shows the XY position of it. We'll ignore that for the time being. It also shows the width and the height, and also there's a little padlock symbol here. When that's locked, any changes you make to the width are reflected in the height and vice versa. So I'm going to lock the padlock because it's a square, we don't want to change it to a rectangle. And I'm going to change the size to 200. Hit enter, and as you can see the height has changed to 200 as well. It's too big to fit on the screen now, so I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to do that using the mouse scroll wheel. So I hold down the control key and rotate the mouse wheel, and that allows me to zoom out and vice versa. To actually pan around the screen, if you press the scroll wheel down, you can drag the screen around to reposition things better for you. These buttons along here are to do with snapping. Snapping allows you to position things in your artwork much more accurately. We turn snapping on here. We can select to snap to different things. I like to turn most of them on to begin with, and if I ever need to, I'll turn them off afterwards. So I'll do that now. Just click on each of these, click them on. And you'll see how this works as we go along. And another thing that helps me to position things more accurately is guidelines, so I'm going to use a couple of those. To produce guidelines, you click on the rulers up here and hold your left mouse button down and drag, and that pulls the guideline down into the work area. The guidelines are not visible in the final artwork. So you can see that little X has appeared there, and it says guide origin to object midpoint. So that's going to the middle of this square that I've drawn. We'll do the same for a vertical one, so point the ruler here, click the left mouse button and drag, and again a little X appears, and it's at the midpoint again, which is what I want. I also want a diagonal one. You can produce vertical and horizontal and diagonal guidelines, but you can also adjust them to different angles afterwards. But for the time being, I just need a diagonal one. So I'll go up to this side of the ruler here, click and drag, and put that on the intersection of the other two guides again. So that's snapping so that the guides all intersect at the same part. If I zoom in very closely, you can see that no matter how far I zoom in, it's still intersecting the three guidelines together. By the way, excuse me, if the rulers are not showing, you just go up to View, Show Hide, and there you have the rulers. Control R is the keyboard shortcut for it. So now we've done all the preparatory work, the rather boring stuff if you like. So let's do something a little bit more entertaining. First of all, in case we get any crashes, and occasionally Inkscape has been known to crash, especially as you get more and more complicated pieces of artwork. So it's very prudent to regularly save your work. And if you go to File, you can see that Save is there, and probably the most important keyboard shortcut that you will ever learn is Control and S for save. By the way, before I do that, if you look at the title up here, Celtic Art Demo 2, you'll see there is an asterisk preceding it. That indicates that there are unsaved changes in the file. So I'm going to do Control and S, and you'll see that asterisk disappear as it saves the work. There it goes. The other thing that you can do is File and Save As, which is Shift Control S, which allows you to save it as a different file name. And that's another useful technique that you might employ, because you can name them version 1, version 2, version 3, etc. So that if you make a complete hash of something, you can revert to a previous version and you've not wasted all your work. Okay, let's draw something now. We're going to the Create Stars and Polygons tool, and the keyboard shortcut for that is an asterisk. So click on that, and up here we've got several different adjustments we can make to how this appears. The first two, one creates polygons, so it's indicated by a pentagon, but you can have hexagons, heptagons, decagons, etc, etc. And then the other one is to create a star, which you can have, I think you can have a triangle, maybe not, but you can have a 4-pointed star, 5, 6, 7, etc, etc. We're going to have 4 corners in our creation, so I'll click the down arrow on that. So we've created 4 corners, and we can start drawing and then change these other items afterwards. So I'm going to point to the center of our guide here, and you see the little X appear. Let me scroll into that so you can see it better. And if I click and then press down Control and Shift, it pulls out a square. But I'm just going to let go of that now. So I've created a square, which is not much different than this thing here. But if we now go to this value here and increase that, you'll see that it starts to produce rather a nice shape. I'm going to scroll out because that's become far too big. And I think that is just about the proportions that I want. So now I'm going to go to the Select and Transform Objects tool, click on that. If I click on these handles here at the corner, that allows me to scale the object or resize it, and if I hold the control key down, it keeps the proportions of height and width the same. While I do this, I'm actually going to turn snapping off because it's not helping me at the minute. So just click this button here, the enable snapping button, so snapping is off now. Hold the control key down and that enables me to scale it down. I want it the same size as my square. If I hold the shift key down as well, it does it and keeps it central. So that's about the size I want. Let me scroll in now so we can see it better. And that gives me a nice shape to start to work on, similar to what we saw in the beginning of the video. Now another thing I have to do, both for helping me to construct the artwork and also to make it identical to what you saw in the beginning of the video, is I need to rotate this through 45 degrees. So to do that, if I've already got this pattern selected, I can show you that if I click and drag, that is selected. If I want to undo that now, I hold down Control and press Z or Z for our American friends. And if I want to rotate it, I can click it again. If you watch these handles up here, you'll see that they're changed into curved double-headed arrows. I can now rotate that, but if I hold down the control key, it constrains the rotation to 15-degree increments. So hold control key down and then click and drag this 1, 2, 3. It now nicely rotates it through 45 degrees, which is what I want. Click on it once again, because what I need to do now is resize it because it's smaller than this guide square that I created earlier on. So again, hold Control and Shift and I just pull that out, and that will do about there. So I have now created an object, and I'll just explain a little bit more about that. If I click on this Edit Pass by Nodes tool, you'll see this little dot here, a little circle, which doesn't allow me to do much except rotate it a little bit. That's all it allows me to do. Just going to undo that, so Control and Z again. So that is an object. I want to convert it to a path. But before I do that, I'm going to give it a stroke. So I'll go over to the Fill and Stroke palette over here, and I'll remind you the shortcut for that is Shift, Control and F. F for fill. And I'm on the Stroke Style tab, and the current width of the stroke is 0.5 of a millimeter. I'm going to highlight that and type in 1.8 and hit enter, and we have an 18 millimeter wide stroke. There is no fill. I don't need a fill. I'm going to resize it again because it's a little bit big, but there's another button up here. So what I'm looking for is this button here. When scaling objects, scale the stroke width by the same proportion. If I turn that off and scale this down, you can see what happens. The stroke width has remained at 18 millimeters, and it's destroyed what I was trying to create. I just undo that, Control and Z. Turn that on. If I do the same again, you can see it constrains the proportion of the stroke to the size of the object. And you can see that because the width of the stroke's reduced to 3.2, etc. there. Just undo that again. I just want to reduce that down a little bit, holding the shift key, so we've got it inside that box. Okay. So now I need to add a square to this design, a rounded square, and let me just show you how the square works. So click on the create rectangle and square. As I said before, you click the left mouse button and hold it, and holding the control key, that constrains it to a square. If it's not held, it can become a rectangle. If I press the control key, it constrains it to a square. And if I let go of that, and let's reduce the stroke of that to 4. And you'll see, if I zoom into that, there are some symbols at the corner. This particular symbol here, remember that this is an object, it's not a path. We're going to convert it to a path afterwards, but that will become clearer when I do that. But this little handle here enables you to round off the corners until you eventually end up with a perfect circle. And you can choose any amount of rounding that you want. This button up here is a useful little thing, because if you draw a second square now, it will retain the same roundedness of the corners, if you like, that the first square had that you drew. So if I draw another square here, that's got rounded corners as well, but if I click this button here, it makes them square. And if I select this one here, it makes that square as well. But I need to go to the edit paths by nodes button before I can reveal its handles that we had before. And I'm lying to you, I'm telling you lies, because that option has disappeared because I've moved off it. But you can do it manually anyway, you can just move that back. So that's how the create squares and rectangles works. I'll just click on the select tool again, hold down the control key and rotate the mouse wheel to zoom out. I'm now going to drag a box around those two squares to delete them. So click the left mouse button and hold it down, and anything within that rectangle that I've just dragged out becomes selected, and I hit the delete key and they disappear. Okay, so now I'm going to draw a square on my artwork here. So get the create rectangles, point to the center. Oh, I need to turn snapping back on. If you remember, I turned it off earlier on, so turn snapping back on. Up there, and now drawing from the center, click and drag, hold down the control key, hold down the shift key, and I want it something about like that. I also want to make some rounded squares, so click on this little round button here, pull it down, and I have some rounded corners. Click on the select tool again. I'm just going to make it a shade bigger, so hold down the control and shift key, drag out. I think that is just about how I want it. I also want to give it a wider stroke, but not quite as wide as the, shall we call it, the 4-leaf clover. So I'll highlight the stroke width over here in the fill and stroke palette. I just put in 13 in that. And if you're wondering where I get these numbers from, well, I've done this before, so I've just done them by trial and error. I'm just going to scale that down a little bit again, control and shift, and drag the handle in a little bit, and that's begin to look something like what you want. Now, to help us in constructing this artwork or graphic, I'm just going to change the colours. So I'll make this square that we've just created green. So don't forget that this is a stroke. So I point to green on the colour palette, hold the shift key down and click, and that turns it green. And now select the 4-leaf clover, and we'll turn that pale blue. So hold the shift key down, turn that pale blue. And we've got the basis of our pattern. Now, as I said before, these are objects, and we're going to convert them to paths before we can do anything else. So let's show you with this square here. Just select that, and if I go to path and object path, keyboard shortcut for that is Shift Control C. But before I do that, let's return to the Edit Paths by Nodes button here, and you can see we've still got the little round handles that enabled us to make the rounded corners. So I'll go back to the Select tool and go to Path, Object Path, and nothing appears to have changed. But if we go back to the Edit Paths by Nodes button again, you'll see that those rounded handles have disappeared, and we end up with these little squares, which are actually nodes which allow us to edit the shape of the path as it is now. And don't forget that this is still a stroke. So if I click and drag that node, or get hold of this handle here, I can change curves and things like that. Let's just undo that. Control Z again to undo it. Press the mouse wheel down to drag back into view. So that's now converted to a path. Let's do the same to the 4-leaf clover. So get the Select tool again, click on the 4-leaf clover, path. Let's try that again. Path, object path. There we go. And if I click on the Edit Paths by Nodes, you can see it's got these 4 nodes here. And again, if I click and grab one of those, it alters completely the shape of what we're doing. Control and Z. And finally, before proceeding, I want to convert these from strokes to paths. Sorry, from strokes to fills. A correction there. So let's select the square again and go to path and stroke to path. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Control Alt and C. And now if I click on the Edit Paths by Nodes button, you'll see that rather than having these nodes in the center of the path, they've moved to the outer and inner edges or perimeters. If I now click on them, we get a different effect again. Okay, so just do Control Z again twice. Now, if I want to change the colour of that, that is no longer a stroke, so I don't need to hold the Shift key down to change the colour of it. So I'm simply changing a fill now. So if I point to this pink colour here, without holding Shift key and click it, it changes the colour of that to pink. Do the same to the 4-leaf clover, path, stroke to path, Control Alt C, and again if I click green, it changes the colour of it.